Welcome to Boom, where we have biomechanics on our minds.
Boom.
Boom.
Boom, boom, boom.
Boom.
Okay, today we are talking with Dr. Bob Guldberg. Bob is the Vice President and Executive Director of the Knight Campus for Accelerating Scientific Impact at the University of Oregon, as well as the Principal Investigator of the Goldberg Lab. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Bob.
That's a great pleasure.
Yeah, it's really fun to be talking with you. And we love asking this question to start out. When did you first know you wanted to be a biomechanist?
You know, I'm not sure when I first knew what a biomechanist was, but probably not long after I figured that out, and that I could, make a career out of doing it. I was a Mechie undergrad at Michigan, so this was, I hate to admit it, but it was like the 1980s. So there wasn't a bioengineering undergrad program back then. And I was trying to figure out whether to go to med school or go to grad school. So I jumped into an orthopedic biomechanics lab that was run by Steve Goldstein. And so Steve had a really big lab in orthopedics at Michigan. And it was a really cool time to join that lab because they were doing some super pioneering work on developing and using micro CT to define microstructure function relationships in bone. So we had like one of the first micro CT systems in the world that was actually
Very
developed at
cool.
Ford Motor Company and then was donated to Michigan. And so we got to work on some of the software, and it was in like this lead-lined room and completely custom built. And that work really enabled us to start to look at skeletal fragility and also my work, which was studying mechanical adaptation during bone healing. So that's really, I think, where I got really excited about, being a biomechanist. And I also, I mean, one of my early lessons was at Michigan was finding and valuing learning from different mentors. And Scott Hollister was there. I don't know if you know Scott Hollister. He was actually most recently become pretty well known for developing 3D printed implants that have saved a lot of babies' lives with tracheal splints. But back then, he was one of the early people who was doing image-based finite element modeling. And so I began working with him, and we were using micro CT to create, really fast, large finite element models from voxels to analyze
Wow.
complex microstructures. And we actually got to start a company together. So as a graduate student, I got to start a company with Scott that was called VoxelCon. VoxelCon is voxel convergence. And that was super pivotal for me because it was my first exposure to translating academic work into something that could have kind of a broader impact in a different way.
Yeah.
And really solidified for me wanting to be a professor and, and both do discovery research, but also be an academic entrepreneur.
That's so interesting. I think your excitement for starting the company, but then from that wanting to become a professor, I think sometimes we think of those as two different paths, maybe. So it's cool to hear your perspective on that and how that actually solidified that you wanted to become a professor.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I was the same way. I didn't realize you could do both. And I think, for academic entrepreneurs, they're kind of characterized in a couple ways. One is they probably don't have quite the risk tolerance that a true, entrepreneur does going out and starting a company. But also, I think it's somebody who, really also enjoys fundamental discovery-based research. And that was the thing that was cool to me, is I could think about being able to do both, to work with students to do that sort of, NIH funded research. And then, when it made sense to go ahead and translate it out into a company.
I think that key of like knowing when it makes sense is also like both, right? Like you sort of build that wisdom maybe as you go along, but I'm interested to see, how have you developed that? Just because I think that's the part I always struggle with. Like, how do you know when to take it further?
Yeah, I think you're right, Hannah. I think it is something you learn as you go along, and you kind of start to recognize when the stars align. So at this point, I guess I've started maybe 6 companies, and
Wow.
I've had the whole experience. I mean, I've had ones like VoxelCon did okay. I mean, we did pretty well, and we ended up selling it to a company in Japan. But we missed a lot of great business opportunities because we really didn't know what we were doing, honestly. We had
Mhm.
some good technology, but and good software, but we really didn't know from the business side. So that was a learning experience, right? And the next time you do it a
Right.
little better. I've also had companies that failed completely miserably because they had too long of an expensive regulatory pathway. And so I learned from that.
Mm.
And then I've also, had some that are, now creating medical devices that are in thousands of patients. So it's, I think it's the
Wow.
whole
Wow.
gamut, and you learn as you go along. So my advice would be just to get the experience, even if it doesn't end up being successful the first time.
That's really good advice, I think. And I love that term academic entrepreneur. I like wrote that down. I was like, that sounds, I haven't heard that before, but I feel like that sounds really exciting. And I'm curious, in terms of personal characteristics, are there traits that you found that have really supported you in being an academic entrepreneur, or characteristics that you've started to cultivate or realized have benefited you the most in that sort of path?
I think for me, it probably started back at Michigan when I was in Steve Goldstein's lab. We always had industry partnerships. And
Hmm.
so I got an opportunity to see, both the pros and cons of being in industry, right? So yeah, the
Mm.
pace of things moving in industry, and the fact that if it's not an industry and not a product, then it's unlikely to have the same impact on patients and things like that. On
Mhm.
the other hand, I could see that if I went that route fully, that I might eventually not like the fact that I couldn't be innovative in terms of what I worked on in the lab, or, I might not be as excited about developing products and things like that all the time. So that balance of being able to do both, I think, is what really excited me.
Mm. And is it easy to do that in your academic career? I guess going into becoming a professor, um, is that
Mm.
something that you were sort of let the university know that that's what you are interested in doing, and are the universities really supportive of that sort of yeah, combining entrepreneurship with being a professor,
Yeah, that's a
especially
great
just
question.
starting out?
Right, right. Well, definitely when I started as an assistant professor, it was kind of taboo to start a company as an assistant
Mm,
professor. You were encouraged to kind of focus on getting tenure and getting your
Mhm.
your lab off the ground. And that's, it's not bad advice, honestly. But I think more and more now people are starting companies earlier. And one of the things that I'm trying to do in the night campus, and really is the mission of the night campus, is to break down those barriers and make it easier to do startup
Mm.
companies, if that makes
mm,
sense. And in fact, we've even taken it a step further in the tenure criteria for our faculty. We've integrated innovation and entrepreneurship as one of the metrics that they can be
mm,
positively reviewed on. And so that's actually something that's not very typical. And even if it's not actively discouraged, a lot of times universities won't actually give credit for doing it. And so that's something we're
Mm.
trying to fix.
mm. Yeah, it's really nice to see that become an actual component or value of the university, and see you push that forward. And I feel like I could keep talking to you about this because I find it so fascinating. Maybe we could talk a little bit about your research to, yeah, also understand some of the research underlying some of these innovations. And we've seen that your research focuses on musculoskeletal tissue generation using technologies like advanced biofabrication and selective laser melting to engineer new medical devices. Can you tell us a little bit about what this means? You've talked about it briefly, some of the projects that you've worked on and have been translated, but I would be grateful to know some of the projects that are currently going on in your lab.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, some of the current focuses are on regenerative rehabilitation. And so I really like this area
Mm.
because as I came out from my PhD and my postdoc, I moved into the field of tissue engineering, which was kind of just getting off the ground. But I always had that background in biomechanics and mechanical adaptation. And so regenerative rehabilitation is really combining those two, and it's looking
Mhm.
at how
Mm,
how do our stem cell therapies and our protein delivery systems and things like that how do those interact with what's often separated in terms of patient care, the rehabilitation side of things, in order to optimize the outcomes. And so we've done some work, for example, looking at vascularization during bone healing, and how does the magnitude and the timing of the rehabilitation affect those early vascularization events. And it's dramatic, it's very potent. And so you can, if you get it wrong, you can actually completely disrupt the healing process. And if you get it right, you can actually accelerate it beyond what it could be. And so it's I think it's an under appreciated interaction between those two. So that's definitely one main area. We're doing that in bone, we're doing it in muscle, we're doing it in joints with osteoarthritis. And then another big area is looking at the interface between trauma and immunoengineering. And so that was based on some work funded by the DoD. Just long story short, we discovered that much like in human patients, some of our treatments, which would work in a young, acutely injured, healthy preclinical model, if we started adding complexities that were similar to what you saw in human patients, we started to see responders and non-responders. And so we
Wow.
dug deeper into that and did a lot of flow cytometry and proteomics and multivariate modeling, and have developed some serum-based biomarkers of trauma outcomes that we can measure very early on. So we can take a blood sample at a week and measure some immune cells in particular that demonstrate a dysregulated immune response to trauma and treatment, that we can predict how they're going to end up. And so that's
Wow.
valuable to orthopedic surgeons just as a biomarker. But we also have NIH
Wow.
funding now to develop an immunomodulation strategy, similar to what's being done in the cancer field, to try and turn trauma non-responders into responders.
Wow. That is incredible. I feel like these are great examples of how science can really aid these processes that have traditionally been very clinical, and you depend on a lot of patient clinician interaction to kind of do what these biomarkers can do for you, like in telling you where you are at in different stages of healing, injury, rehab, and it is just so cool to see actual tangible examples of being able to make these measurements, have have this knowledge of what those measurements mean, and then how to react to it. And I can totally see, that whole pipeline.
Yeah, I think we're finally beginning to realize all the benefits of personalized medicine that,
Mhm.
were kind of hyped, a decade ago. And it's really
Right.
taken a lot of advancements in, what we can measure. And then you've got all this data, right? And so the machine learning and multivariate modeling, all that's
Right.
become so important, and has been a real learning process for me, to learn those aspects and integrate them into our research. But your question was really about our medical device work, and that's always been an interest also in the lab, is studying devices and how they functionally integrate and
Mhm.
perform in vivo. But it really came into focus for me about 10 years ago because of a personal motivation within my family. My daughter, at the age of 14, was diagnosed with stage 4 spondylolisthesis. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's kind of
Wow.
like scoliosis, but it's a anterior posterior type deformity, where in her case, in her lower back, one of her vertebra was about 80% slipped off of the other. And it
Wow.
was a total shock. She was a nationally ranked tennis player at the time, had really no back problems at all.
Wow.
And by the time we discovered it, the doctor said, there was no choice, but she needed a 2-level spine fusion. And so she
Wow.
went through that. She was incredibly brave. It's a very, difficult, painful recovery. And she
Mm.
went through the rehab. And then about 9 months after surgery, she turned over in bed, and she felt the titanium rods in her back snap. They
Oh.
broke just turning in bed.
Oh my gosh.
And what had happened was the fusion device had failed, and she
Mm.
needed to undergo a second 7-hour surgery. So, that was also a surprise, because you expect young people to heal
Wow.
well. And I did a little bit of digging, and was really surprised to see how often spine fusions actually fail.
Mm.
And so that kind of led to some work with a collaborator at Georgia Tech named Professor Ken Gall. And he and I recruited a couple of really outstanding PhD students. and we set out to design a better spine fusion device. And
Wow.
what we ended up designing was a surface porous PEEK device. So PEEK is polyether ether ketone. It's a very common material used because the doctors can image it and verify fusion, but it doesn't integrate as well as, say, titanium
Hmm.
into the body. And so we created basically PEEK spine fusion cages, but we made a process where we could make the surface of it be porous in about 500 micron
Hmm.
layer. And that ended up like tripling the integration strength of the
Wow.
implants.
Wow.
So once we saw those good results, we started a company called Vertera, and we cleared a couple of those devices through the FDA. And Vertera was actually acquired by NuVasive in 2017, and now those implants are benefiting, thousands of spine patients. So that
Wow.
was
Wow.
a good experience in terms of that was one of the examples of entrepreneurship where it actually worked quite well.
Right. Wow.
And then now we currently have we took that same team, we kept the band together, so to speak, and we've created a new company called Restore 3D, which is doing 3D printed implants. And we have, we can make architectures that you can only
Hmm.
make using 3D printing. So like complex gyroid shaped porous architectures that have really great mechanical and biological advantages. And then, of course, you can do this as a customization. So we work with doctors. We'll take a bad fracture and design an implant that matches the anatomy of the patient.
Hmm.
So you can do that, and it turns out actually it's quite economical to make implants using 3D printing. So I think really that's the future of medical device innovation and manufacturing.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm curious with your, well, first of all, I mean, it's amazing sometimes how the things that going on in our life, like we could never predict,
Hmm.
what we might venture into. And I can't imagine there being a better motivation than, with your daughter going through something like that,
Yep.
to design a better device. And when you are then thinking to change this design and you're choosing, somehow you came upon changing the surface of it to make it porous, and you saw these massive improvements. And I'm curious how that sort of comes into play, like how you think up these design features that can improve the device. Is it looking into other fields of what's going on? Is it yeah, like where do those sort of like inspirations come from, and how you get those types of ideas?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these are collaborative things, right? So Ken Gall and I basically had decided we liked working together. We had complementary strengths. He was an expert in material science. I was an expert in biomechanics and preclinical model testing. And then we had identified this as a need in the market. So the first thing you do, of course,
Hmm.
is you look at what is out there. Why is it not currently working? So we looked at it and we realized the surgeons really liked this PEEK material. It had really good mechanical properties. It was not as stiff as titanium. It just didn't integrate. And so that really identified the fundamental problem that we had to fix. Other people in the field were trying to fix that by sort of spray coating on titanium and things like that, but then that delaminates. And so,
Hmm.
I have to give a lot of credit to Ken and also the PhD students that we co-advised, who then thought about from a material science perspective, how can we create a durable porous interface that's not going to delaminate? And it
Hmm.
turned out to be something actually relatively simple. We took salt particles and use the properties of the polymer with heat and
Wow.
pressure to extrude the salt
Hmm.
particles into the material, and then just use water to take out the salt particles, and
Huh.
what you're left with is a really strong, durable, porous interface.
Wow. That is so cool. It's so cool to see the interplay of these different disciplines. And also, it's incredible for you, yeah, as a professor to have like so much experience and wisdom in all these areas from entrepreneurship to, material science. it's cool to see how you've been able to integrate it to really have impact.
Well, I'm
And
having
so,
fun.
well, that's
Just
important too.
just to finish the story about my daughter, whose name is Sophia, she came back from her second surgery and she won 2 state championships in high school tennis, and she's currently a
Wow.
PhD student at UCSF studying cancer immunology. So she had a good ending to her story, but it was a rough couple years for her, for sure.
Wow.
That's
But
amazing.
her story has impacted so many, both on her own and through you, right? I'm sure that did her story inspire, her love for science or anything like that, or fuel her own research desires?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. She's, she always told me, she said, I love science, Dad, but I'm not going to be an engineer. And I said, that's fine. So she's a biochemist and much smarter than her dad.
Smart in different ways is like what I like to say. um, Well, I just wanted to touch a little bit on this theme of integrating so many disciplines, because we were just looking at your lab page, and it's you have a lab full of different members with lots of different educational backgrounds. And you've got people with molecular biology degrees to people, a postdoc with a doctor of dental surgery.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and so, and lots of, mechanical and bioengineering in between. So we're just wondering, how does leading, what are the effective practices for leading such an interdisciplinary team with so many diverse backgrounds, and how has this fueled your own research and the way that you've had impact?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first part is just embracing interdisciplinarity. There have been some really cool studies done on uh, the effectiveness of educational programs and research programs and even entrepreneurship. And interdisciplinarity always comes up as a key element of the success of those groups. And so
Mhm.
I've always embraced it. I had to kind of learn things in a sequential way as I was going through, because we didn't really have integrated programs. So I was an engineer first, and then I did a postdoc in molecular biology and learned some business along the way. So we're trying to integrate some of those things a little more. But as a result of that, yeah, my lab's very interdisciplinary. And I just look for opportunities. My postdoc that just joined us with the DDS, it was an opportunity. I was talking to a colleague, and he says, I have a fantastic PhD student who's finishing, and she'd be potentially interested in a postdoc, and she's been fantastic. So
Wow.
she's taking us in some new directions with some projects that we would never have taken on above the head. I've worked mostly below the head in my career. It's still bone. There's still bone and muscle and cartilaginous tissues. So I think we can make an impact there too.
Wow. That's amazing. I guess above the head because dental is in your
Right.
mouth.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I've been really lucky to work with amazingly talented students,
Mhm.
and they have been diverse in lots of different ways. And one of the things that really motivates me and continues to motivate me is to
Mhm.
see them develop and all their accomplishments now in companies and government, and a dozen
Mhm.
or so of them are now professors themselves, and some of them have graduated students. So I guess that makes me an
Wow.
academic grandpa.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not a real grandpa yet, fortunately. So, but
Wow.
I think the biggest challenge maybe with that diversity is just understanding that every person's different,
Mhm.
and how to sort of unlock every individual person's potential. It's one of the things I had to learn as a young professor is, not to expect everybody to think the same way you do. And that's, you have to work with them on an individual basis.
Which I could imagine happens regardless of if they're studying the same topic or not.
Completely,
Are there
yeah.
are there, when you say you had to learn that as a young professor, are there things that have aided in that, and any
Mhm.
main takeaways or advice that you would give to a young professor regarding that?
I think it's just setting priorities,
Mm.
that you need to spend individual time with your faculty. I'm not trying to be critical, but I've never wanted to run a lab with, 20 postdocs and, 30 students, because I wouldn't be able to spend time with them individually. So my lab's always maxed out at about 15 people, in total. The one bit of advice I do give is that early on when you're developing your lab, you really have to spend extra time because you don't have this hierarchy of experience in your lab. So you guys probably experience this, right? If you're in a fully developed lab, you've got postdocs and senior grad students who provide mentorship to the younger graduate students. And so once you have that hierarchy, I think there can be a really effective mentorship system in place. But for young faculty, they don't have that yet. So they need to really spend time, individually with the students.
It's cool to see the theme of personalization come through in like each level of work that you do.
I had to do it as a baseball coach too.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
Yeah. Back in kid pitch, you had to learn how to, or coach pitch, you had to learn how to throw the pitch into the individual hitter's swing. So
Whoa. I wonder if there's like a parallel to a fun like research like parallel.
I see lots of parallels between athletics and academics for sure.
Yeah, have you borrowed any coaching strategies over into your mentoring practices?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we just talked about one, but yeah, the importance of building a great team, for sure, is a big part of it.
Wow.
Yeah, when I think about my team, and for some reason I think about softball a lot and all of the cheers that we had, and like sometimes I wish that we had the same way, like chants and cheers. I feel like they're always really energizing. I tried to make a lab cheer actually for our lab during COVID, but it didn't quite stick. But still haven't given up yet.
I like it though. You're innovating, so keep trying.
Yeah, thank you. Scott didn't exactly explain it that way, but I like that reframe. Yeah.
Well, it's cool how we've seen you like build out your lab on build yourself as a person, build your lab on an individual level. And now, and we talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the interview, but you've created a new department at the University of Oregon. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, and just what were the big challenges there, and how were you intentional about, you said you really wanted to be intentional about integrating entrepreneurship with that and having that built into the structure. So can you just tell us a little bit more about that? And then we'll go one level up as in your involvement in, alliances outside the university.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of the motivation for coming to the University of Oregon. I was at Georgia Tech for, I think, 22 years, and my son was playing baseball there at the time, so I wasn't really looking to leave, but you don't hear about many opportunities to build an entire new campus with the incredible resources that Phil and Penny have provided for the night campus. And then I think what clinched it was I kept saying, well, you don't want me, I'm an engineer. And they kept saying, well, you're exactly what we want because we want engineering. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is an opportunity to start a bioengineering program, which all of my mentors and the people that were, the people I really looked up to in the field, that's what they did back in the 70s. They were at the early stages of people coming from mechanical engineering and aerospace engineering to start the bioengineering field. And this was an opportunity to do that. So that's a lot of the reason I really was excited to take on this role and launch an engineering program at the University of Oregon. So yeah, it's growing very fast. The PhD program, we're recruiting now our third cohort of PhDs, and we have, I think, over 150 applicants this year, which for such a young program is really amazing. And a credit to our staff and our faculty that are out there recruiting. And we've got a minor that we launched this year. So the PhD program, I think currently has 20 students in it. We have a minor that we're offering at the undergraduate level
Oh,
before
wow.
we offer a full undergraduate degree program. And then we actually have a large master's program that's a master's internship
Mm.
program with over 150 students in that. And so it's a really, I
Wow.
love that program. It's completely focused on industry needs. So there's tracks based on what industry needs. The students come
Mm.
in, they take
Wow.
6 months of courses, they do a 9-month internship, and then 98% of them have jobs in the industry coming out.
Wow.
So it's
Mm.
yeah, and the diversity of that program is amazing because of the efforts of the staff to make it that way.
Mhm.
So it's really a
Mm.
world-class program.
Yeah, that's amazing. And actually, we've seen that there has been this focus on diversity um, across your
Mhm.
institution, and it's even considered formally a strategic priority to cultivate diversity and build an inclusive community for the Knight campus. Can you talk a little bit more about what this actually does look like in practice, and how it's impacted the campus, and even you and your lab?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You must have seen our strategic plan. That's awesome. Thanks for looking at that. Um, yeah, I mean, that's the first thing we did is we ran a strategic planning process, and we did make it one of the 5 pillars of the Knight campus. And so I do think it's important to make that an explicit part of your community.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think I think what's different that we're trying to do is obviously building in some of this training early on, but it's also not to just make it talk, to make it actually really
Mhm.
action in action. And so we have a couple programs that I'm really proud of. One is that master's internship program that's so diverse. Over 50% of the
Mm.
students are women or other underrepresented groups in STEM in that program.
Oh.
And then we also have a postdoc program that's completely based around, of course, connecting with clinical collaborators, but also it's completely based around providing opportunities for underrepresented groups to gain experience and gain confidence,
Mm.
basically, that this is a good career path. Because one of the things we found was that a lot of people shift away from academics or career paths following a PhD at
Mm.
that stage because of a lack of
Mhm.
confidence.
Wow. That is and I love that it sounds like you've done some needs finding to figure out what those needs are and to directly combat them with, the programmatic elements, the way you're approaching people and recruitment, like all of that. It's just really cool to see the intention and actually carry through there.
Well, I think the key is really not doing these things because they're expected or
Hmm.
or even because it's the
Mm.
right thing to do, but because you inherently believe that
Hmm.
diversity is a key part of excellence, and as we
Hmm.
talked about earlier, objectively creates better teams. And
Hmm.
so, if
Mm.
that's really your motivation, it's not going to be a one-time thing. It's going to be part of who you are.
Right,
Mm.
right. And I've always thought about this is a kind of tangential example, but with grades, like going through grade school, like grades weren't shouldn't be the motivation. Like learning the material should be, but grades help you reflect on how well you're doing. Just in the same way with like your motivation for like believing that diversity actually improves the overall well-being of everyone involved and the research that you're doing and the impact that you can have. And then the numbers and everything are just a reflection of that, but that's not what you're striving for
Yeah.
in the end. So I
One of the
like that.
coolest things for me has been, when you're starting a new program like this, it's starting from scratch, right? So the
Hmm.
initial people we recruited came in, and I have one postdoc who's from Colombia, and she's like, "This is difficult because there's nobody here for me to relate to, just because there's
Mm.
there's literally nobody here yet." And so now that we're a few years into it and have this really diverse community, it's fantastic to see the Latin dancing and food events out on the patio, and all kinds of stuff where people are finding finding communities for them to relate to who are not necessarily from their same group. It's just that there's such a diversity of people from around the world. They're all enjoying that environment.
And in this, I feel like it's hard to be in these times where it feels both isolating and lonely, but also like we're able to connect with people. We're connecting with you across, other states, and a lot of miles between us. But in that way, I think it's been cool to connect to larger parts, even outside, your own university. So I'd just love to chat a little bit about and hear a little bit about your involvement in like sort of larger initiatives. I know you're a leader in the Tsai Human Performance Alliance, and I'd just like to hear about your involvement with that. Why were you excited about it, and what does success look like to you as being a leader in that program?
Maybe you could briefly say what the Tsai Performance Alliance is too, since maybe not everyone listening will be familiar.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so God, I'm so excited about that. It's probably the most exciting thing I've worked on in my entire career. I've worked on some really big, NSF and NIH funded projects, but this one really, really captures my passion because it's really, I think, a huge need. Really, the Tsai Human Performance Alliance is designed to discover the fundamental principles associated with peak performance. And of course, that's relevant to athletes, but it's also really relevant to all of us. And it's an area that, rightly so, there's tons of funding that goes into and philanthropy that goes into cardiovascular health and brain health and cancer and things like that. Relatively less in the musculoskeletal field. Because we don't think about it killing people necessarily. But musculoskeletal problems are the biggest cause of pain and disability, in the world. And if you look at the funding at the federal level, it's just much, much less in those other areas. So this fills a great need, and the scale and the scope of it is just completely unprecedented. So combining the expertise of leaders at Oregon and Stanford and Harvard, UCSD, Salk Institute, and University of Kansas, and then having the ability to work on this over the next decade, I'm really excited about the progress we're going to be able to make.
Yeah, I think we're really excited to see the progress you're going to make too. Hannah and I have been fortunate to be able to sit in on some of the talks, and I think just the diversity of the people involved and then the impact that everyone is making is just really unheard of and like just really unimaginable to me. Sometimes I feel when I'm and how does it feel to be, I guess, what do you feel like is your role in it, as everyone's kind of doing their own research but together, like coming together for the same purpose? Or I guess I'm curious your thoughts on like how all of these very different areas can come together and make a bigger impact as a single alliance together.
Well, I mean, one thing you probably don't know is that it came together over a year. So we started with a whiteboarding session in La Jolla with Clara Wu, and she and Tom Skalak, who's her scientific advisor for the Wu Tsai Foundation, invited a group of us down to whiteboard with her on ideas. And Scott was in that, and I was in that, and probably about 10 other people. And the amazing thing was, this, billionaire sat in there with us the entire time. She was so engaged and so excited about what we were doing. And that then led to about a year of going through ideas and refining them and putting together what is now the alliance. And so it was really well thought out and really well put together. Part of the thing that really excites me is Scott, and I have known each other for most of our careers, but we've never had a chance to work together because he's in a slightly different area of biomechanics than I am, right? So being able to combine efforts between what he does and what I do is super exciting. one of the things that we're doing that we're excited about is building in sensors into our
Mm,
devices so that we can actually monitor what's going on, during rehabilitation,
mhm.
and doing actually sort of personalized feedback control during rehab in order to
Wow.
accelerate the repair process.
Wow.
Mm.
That's gonna revolutionize rehab for sure. And I also think mentally, like whenever if I'm rehabbing anything, if I have anything to measure, like and give feedback to myself even just mentally, it's like much more stimulating and much more motivating to stick with the rehab and stick with the process.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. Yeah, well, of course, it won't surprise you. We have a startup company around this idea. So it's called Pandaria. Pandaria is developing suture buttons that have sensors in them and are passively powered through Bluetooth. And so you can imagine doing a rotator cuff repair and doing the rehab, and the physical therapist, being able to say, okay, you're doing a little too much. Let's move from 10 pounds down to 5 pounds, or you're not doing enough. We're not in the optimal,
Mhm.
window for stimulating repair. So that's the hope.
Mm. Yeah, that's really exciting and innovative, and I can't wait to see, um, where these projects take you,
Mhm.
and especially with you being an entrepreneur too. It's like I feel like you come from a place of like knowing what the impact will be, and I feel like that's can drive
Mhm.
things forward, and that's really exciting. And it also I think really uh, made me kind of get this feeling when you talked about how you and Scott have known each other your whole careers but
Mhm.
haven't had the chance to work together, and I feel like that's something that I think about sometimes when I think about my lab members or people in other labs, people I meet at conferences, and it's always like, where are you going to be in your career? Like, we never know what's going to happen and how we can continue to lift each other up and build things together, and you never know when you're going to have that opportunity, which is really exciting. And we also I guess this leads to another question where we've noticed such a diverse range of not just people, but animals that you work with in your lab. And uh, and notice that your lab actually has a fair number of four-legged lab members, and
Hmm.
that appear to
Hmm.
be dogs that have filled your lab positions, like assistant to the vice president, chief of naps, which seems like a role that many people might be fighting for. So that was a lucky dog to fill
That's an
that role.
important role. Yeah.
And adjunct pupper. So we're wondering how these four-legged friends joined your lab, if you have open positions, like just what is the status on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're right. Thank you
And
for
why
looking
don't you
at
have
our
any
web.
cats?
It's a great question. They all are currently dogs, but we're not opposed to cats.
Okay.
We're
Okay.
definitely open to diversity. One recent member asked whether a snake was possible to add to the website, which might require renaming it, because it wouldn't be
Yeah, that'd
four-legged.
be an overhaul, but yeah,
That'd
it's
be an
worth
overhaul.
considering.
Yeah,
legs
we're
legs
flexible.
optional.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they play a critical role, I think, in the Goldberg lab. But they're primarily responsible for mental health and wellness.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Especially during COVID. And I have to give credit to my postdoc, Lena Mancipi Castro, for that initiative, taking on the initiative to add our four-legged dog member part of the website. In terms of positions we're looking to fill, we're a rapidly growing lab. We have lots of open positions for grad students and postdocs and four-legged members. And I guess the official titles we'll have to negotiate upon acceptance into the lab. So
That seems fair. It seems like it should be a very, individualized basis for titles anyway. So
yeah, I mean, just
On
tenure
the theme of
dog.
personalization.
Exactly, exactly. Based on experience, skill level, including
yes.
tricks and cuteness and all that kind of stuff.
Fluffiness. Yeah, yeah.
Fluffiness, yeah.
Cuddliness.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're gonna I feel like we could talk forever, Bob, with you, but we're nearing the end of our interview, and we're gonna just ask two more questions, our favorite two to close with.
Okay.
Um, and so the first is, can you tell us about a time where you felt like you failed and what you learned from it?
Hmm. Um, that's a really hard question for me because
Mm.
I honestly don't think about my past experiences in terms of failures.
Hmm.
And this is
Mm.
something I try to mentor my students on. And that does not mean I've not made mistakes. I've made tons and tons and tons of mistakes. Um, but one of my professional mentors was a guy named Bob Nerum. And I don't know if you know that name. Bob was he passed away in 2020, but he was a cardiovascular biomechanist and one of the pioneers of the bioengineering field.
Wow.
And he has a list of 20 or so rules of life that I share with anybody who wants them. But one of them was that an unsuccessful experiment is not failure. It's just kind of a learning experience, and you learn as much from those and maybe more than from your successes. And so that's
Mm.
something I've always tried to apply. And I think part of the problem with thinking about failures too much is it makes people afraid to make decisions and afraid to go down paths. And to
Hmm.
me, that's really the only real failure. Because like with startup companies, you learn every time you make a mistake. And so
Hmm.
that's
Mm.
why I don't really, I guess I don't really, it's a hard question for me to answer that.
Yeah, I feel like failure has such a negative connotation with
Mm.
the word. Like maybe we just need to like call them research whoopsies or something. But we hear that a lot in from other people, and I think that's a really good point to make. Is that they're less of failures and more of learning experiences, and I think thinking
Yeah.
about it in that way really takes the pressure off. Because I can think of times where I've made mistakes and of varying impacts, and it's scary at first. It's sometimes you have those heart drop kind of moments, but I think being able to talk about them and having a mentor like you who is open to talking about things like that, and when mistakes happen, then you can confront them head on and figure out your way, what to do and how to move forward and how to learn from it. And I think having that sort of mindset is really empowering.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think, the younger generation now, and I look at this with my two kids, that, they're much wiser and better informed than we were. There was some value in being naive and just trying stuff and then adapting as you went along. I think now sometimes younger generation overthink things and they think if I make a
Mm.
mistake, it's going to be the end of the world, and it's really
Mm.
Hmm.
not. And so that's that's really, we have a quote on our wall from Phil Knight which says, don't let anybody call your ideas crazy, just keep going, and don't
Mm.
even worry too much about where you're going, just don't
Hmm.
stop. And I think that's a good philosophy.
Mm.
Mm.
That's awesome to have that like right on your wall in a physical
Yeah.
space and
Well, Hannah, come
inspiring all
visit.
your lab mates.
I'll show you the wall.
I think be careful. We will be there. We'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah.
um, we'd love to come visit, but we also love to hear of ways that people can follow you in your work. And if you're willing to share those 20 rules of life, we'd also love to share that with the episode. So
Oh, absolutely.
that'd
I'd
be
be
great.
happy to do that. Yeah, in terms of sharing, my students make fun of me for I think, personal record of 2 lifetime tweets. So I'm not personally very active on Twitter, but the Night Campus is very active on Twitter, and people can follow our work and those of our
Okay.
other great faculty and students there.
Thank you. For our last question, I'm really excited to hear your answer on this, but what are you most excited about for the future of biomechanics?
Future of biomechanics. Well, personally, I guess I have to go back to the WUSI Human Performance Alliance. I just think that's such a unique opportunity in biomechanics, just because biomechanics again doesn't tend to necessarily have these large long-term funding opportunities
Mm.
that allow institutions like ours to work together. So I think the chance to make a huge impact there is what I'm probably most excited about. And biomechanics is absolutely integral to that entire project.
Thank you. Maybe if there's any listeners with big pockets, they'll be motivated to start funding some more biomechanics research.
Absolutely. We need more. We really want to make this a global initiative. And so we're looking to add partners all the time. And one of the things that's, one of my jobs is to work with donors. And, Clara and Joe provided amazing funding for the next 10 years. But what we're trying to do is raise funding so that there's a legacy beyond 10 years. And this alliance can continue in perpetuity. So we're building an endowment to make that happen.
Wow.
Well, we're so grateful for that, because I think you're opening the door for so many opportunities for young biomechanists too, to see, the impact of biomechanics, and that there's going to be opportunities there to continue work in this field and make sure that we can have the best opportunity to help people with the discoveries that we're making and the research that we're doing. So we're so appreciative for you, for doing that and all the work that you're doing.
Well, I'm appreciative that there's still amazing students like you guys coming into the field, and that we're, there's exciting things to do. There's so much more to do, and my focus is really at this stage of my career in trying to make people like you all as successful as I can.
Well, you're doing a pretty good job of it, and we really appreciate you coming on Boom and talking to us, sharing your perspectives and wisdom with us, and your excitement for biomechanics. It's just really, inspiring to see all of that. So thank you, Bob.
Well, thanks for having me. I really had fun.
Thanks so much.
Biomechanics off our minds.